Well, I think we'll start. Good afternoon and a very warm, if not rather hot, welcome to lunchtime today. My name's Amy Thomas. I specialise in interim in-house tax recruitment here at Borough Morris. And from Borough Morris this afternoon, I'm accompanied by my colleague Kyle Lindsell, who specialises in first and second permanent tax career moves.
Hello.
Now, hi, Kyle. Now at Borough Morris, we believe there's a lot of positivity and confidence to take away from the current job market. But after the last year that we've all lived through, it is understandable how, as an individual, there may be a confidence dip. And in turn, not everybody may have the same access to market knowledge that we have. So therefore, we decided to hold this event for aspiring tax professionals to hear from a highly esteemed panel of leaders who span the tax industry. And so in today's session, we will be discussing the current tax climate, how to make the most of your CV and the interview process, and how to make an impact when you start a new role and also when you're working towards a promotion. So here to discuss, we have Julia McCullagh, tax partner at BDO, Mark Feldman, head of tax at Smiths PLC of FTSE 100 Business, Andrea Tolley, tax partner at KPMG, and Sarah Williams, Principal Controllership and Tax EMEA for the Walt Disney Company. Now, before we start, if I can just cover some very basic housekeeping areas. This event will be recorded, and for the discussion, Chatham House rules apply. Also, in relation to questions, please ask questions through the chat box. We may not have enough time at the end to run through them, but I will be asking the panel afterwards and I will email responses thereafter. So now then, if I can move straight into the current tax environment, Julia, and as a tax partner, what are you seeing as being the top tax agenda points?
Well, I'm sure everyone will agree with me, there is just so much going on at the moment. But if I have to pick three and trying to keep it big picture, the first is the sheer volume of business change. And that might be, it might be people opening up new markets in new territories. It might be people exiting markets. And we're seeing an awful lot of transaction work and buying and selling. And that can be FTSE 100 level, FTSE 250, large inbound, or in the sort of BDO, fast growing SME, Heartland and private equity. So an awful lot of that going on. We're also seeing a lot of tax authority focus on collecting revenues, which has clear implications for tax professionals. And there's probably a couple of main areas. The first is in the policy area. So, clearly we've had the UK increase in corporate tax rate that's coming, and we're seeing a number of changes in tax rates in other territories too. So companies are needing to adjust for that. But we're also seeing it in the international and sort of supranational environment. I'm sure everyone will have seen the recent G7 finance ministers debate on the digital agenda. So there's an awful lot of policy stuff for tax professionals to keep ahead of. And that's coupled with a lot of focus on anti-avoidance. And we're seeing an awful lot more tax authority audit activity, which is keeping busy. And then the third area I'd probably just mention is the ESG agenda. So sort of the environmental, social and governance is a topic of the moment. And that might be in the environmental area where we're seeing things like plastics taxes coming through, and we're seeing a focus on a carbon border tax being discussed. Social area, transparency more important than ever. Discussions in the EU about what they making perhaps country by country reporting publicly available. And then that comes through a bit to governance as well. And here we're seeing interest in governance at tax authority and at board level. And that might be whether it's looking at senior accounting officer, CCO, strategy, but also it goes a bit further with tax authorities asking about process mapping, digital delivery of tax returns and how that interacts with systems. And I think that's going to be a key area over the next 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. And actually, some of what you mentioned would lead into the controllership area. And Sarah, from an in-house perspective, then we talked about controllership. So what are you seeing as the key tax agenda points at the moment?
Yeah, Amy, I mean, that's exactly sort of what my role really is about, to try and bridge the gap between controllership and tax, because it is all around data and the importance of data, whether that is around the e-invoicing, the e-reporting, making tax digital, or just providing audit support, documentation quickly, accurately, and also that sort of public country by country reporting, all the data that is needed for those external reporting, and it's only going one way. It's getting more and more. So I'm really seeing the benefits of having those two departments really close together. On a purist tax perspective, again, it is that changing environment with the OECD, you know, BEPS 2.0, Pillar 1, Pillar 2, trying to work out what the impacts are, what the rules might be. And with all the other changing legislation like digital services taxes, especially as the business changes, as Julia was mentioning, you know, we have launched Disney Plus. Obviously, that's a different digital streaming service. So therefore, you know, digital services taxes is front and center of the mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And obviously, Sarah, you touched on a few things for the future, really, and that's where I'll sort of step in with the next question. I think, Andrea, I'll come to you. What are you sort of planning for? What do you foresee as being the focus over the next 12 months?
Yeah, well, picking up on the things that Julia and Sarah mentioned, there's obviously a lot in the external environment that's really driving change in businesses, but there's also, you know, COVID has had significant impact as well in terms of what businesses are looking at. So we're seeing quite a lot of movement around the value chain, actually, as the business changing to respond to something like COVID. And so there's a lot more work, a lot more focus on those sorts of things. I'm transfer pricing, so that's kind of my focus is on the TP angles of it. So we're seeing quite a lot of businesses start to think, okay, where are we going to be based and how is our business actually going to operate going forward? And then that leads into a bit more of the corporate tax angle, which is around the tax structuring. What are the flows going to look like? With Pillar 2 and the minimum tax base coming in, actually, what does that mean for my effective tax rate, and do I need to rethink about that? And transfer pricing obviously has a big impact on that as well. So it's bringing those two things together. One of the other things we're seeing, and we're doing quite a lot of work on at the moment, is this remote working angle. So I think it's always been there in terms of hiring senior people in places that they would like to live rather than where maybe your headquarters is based. But I think COVID's really accelerated that, and so there's quite a lot of work at the moment on that piece. And it's not just on the corporate tax; it's the corporate tax and the employment tax kind of coming together and looking at the two angles of that, and the impact on the business and the stress that something like that puts on the business. You've got a good employee. How do you manage those situations? So we're seeing a lot around that. And then I think Julia sort of mentioned it, and Sarah picked up on it as well. Just the compliance angles. So we're seeing huge shifts in compliance. Obviously, there's a lot more data and information requirements coming through from tax authorities. There's a greater angle in terms of what the board would like to see, or the C-suite, as we always like to refer to them. And I think that will only start to increase. And even when you look at something like HMRC's consultation document on documentation, the increase in the information dealing schedules and potentially even an evidence log to support your documentation. I think we're going to see a lot more of that from different tax authorities, which means that there's a lot more areas that you can play in terms of compliance. And so I think that'll be a key area as well.
Cool, lots to think about. And Mark, same question to you in terms of the next 12 months. What's going to be on your mind?
So I work as the head of tax in Smiths, which is an engineering company, and it's very diversified, which is quite unusual in the FTSE 100. So we've got divisions that cover airport scanners for your baggage. So when you take your laptop out and get it put through and make sure there's no threats there. We also look at big machinery and plant like oil and gas refinery and the like. And a lot of what tax is about is responding, as I think others have said, to the business need. And there is a huge amount of change happening in our businesses. So, for example, we've used our expertise in detection of threats, be it software packages in an airport or COVID-related risk. We now have something that can detect COVID in the atmosphere, which is being used in US locker rooms. And there's clearly business aspects and tax aspects to that. But if I pull back from those specific Smiths issues and look at the wider environment, which people have already talked about, I would say this is absolutely exciting time to be in tax. It's phenomenal, right? If you like this stuff, this is as good as it gets, because we were told back in 2013 when BEPS came out the first time that this was a once in a generational change and the whole world was changing. Actually, as I sit here in 2021, we're about to go through the third and fourth once in a generation change within a generation. So we've had BEPS, we've had the Trump Tax Act in the US, which completely changed foreign direct investment flows and the like, and M&A structures indeed. We're now going to go into Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, if we believe the G7, and indeed Biden and the Senate are wrestling to form US reform, putting it halfway back to where it was, but with some differences. So an absolutely fascinating time to be in tax. That change comes not just on a planning and structural level, but it also comes on the operational level. The tax dollar for fiscs in a post-COVID world is absolutely key. They are going to search for ways to get every single dollar they can, which is going to mean much more aggressive audit activity, as I think Julia mentioned, and they are going to use data to do it. So as Andrea mentioned, they are going to use AI scanning, multiple algorithms that pick up traits in tax authorities, in taxpayers, and say, on top of your public CBCR, which is coming, what is it that we think are your risk areas, and we're going to go after them. And the predominant risk area, and I promise Andrea hasn't paid me to say this, is transfer pricing, right? Transfer pricing is everywhere. And that and indirect taxes are clearly a big focus. And we've seen in the UK on indirect taxes, making tax digital on VAT, there are plenty of other regimes around the world that have gone further, e-invoicing, that Sarah mentioned and the like. And technology and the ability for business to cope with that making tax digital agenda, it's coming on corporate taxes in the UK. How do you get your data in the right place with multiple enterprise systems that don't talk to each other, that have different chartered accounts? That is a huge challenge for business.
Interesting, lots going on, and generational changes just seem to keep happening. So if that's what you like, then tax is for you. But so I think lots of people listening in will be intrigued about what, as a head of tax, what key skills are required. They'll be looking at their route to it and what they can do. So Sarah, I'll come to you on this one as sort of that head of tax within industry. What key skills does the role require at the moment, and do you think any of that's going to change with this sort of hybrid working model and managing people remotely, etc.?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the key skills are business partnering, keeping close to the business, because you can't have the right transfer pricing unless you know who's doing what, where, how, and who's making the key decisions and how the business is changing, and also being there at the forefront, so you have an ability to influence and structure that business tax efficiently before the business has decided what it's going to do and it's a done deal. So yeah, really close business partnering, stakeholder management. Obviously in today's virtual world, it is harder to, you can't just walk up to someone's office or bump into them in the elevator. So it's a case of you have to be more deliberate with your stakeholder engagement and management. I think the other thing is just juggling all the priorities, as we were saying. It's indirect taxes, it's employment taxes, the global mobility, it's the audits, the reporting. You have to learn to juggle all those priorities. And then it's around team, I think, as well, and getting the right team behind you, and to invest in that team and develop their skills. Because I do think as a tax professional, not necessarily head of tax, but a tax professional is changing as well, with all the need for data analytics and working with data. I think that a tax professional's role is changing. It's around being close to business and being able to manage data and lots of priorities.
Cool. And same to you, Mark, on sort of the head of tax industry key skills.
Thanks, Carl. I mean, I'll pick up where Sarah left off. For me, it's all about the team. The world of tax is so complicated now that you, as a head of tax, cannot know everything if you ever could. I certainly don't profess to, but what I do have is a team of people who are better than me, brighter than me at various aspects of their job, and can therefore advise me and what I bring to it. And this is perhaps a little bit unusual in the FTSE market as a head of tax. I grew up, as it were, through the law route. So I was a chemist originally, wanted to do IP, went into law, decided I didn't like IP, and moved into tax. And that gave me a really broad background, issue spotting and judgments around, becoming an expert at that time in capital transactions, transfer pricing, disputes, audits, stamp taxes, VAT, the gamut. And what I therefore do with that knowledge now is use the expertise of my team to just guide them and make sure that they're knitted together in a kind of neural network where your corporate tax specialist is speaking to your transfer pricing specialist who understands how it's all going to get reported. But it's all about the team. And that team has to be focused on serving the business, right? We sometimes, as advisors, perhaps, I used to be an advisor, or indeed in the tax world, get a bit obsessed with, the tax rates, getting to the right tax answer. But actually, if you've imposed so much operational complexity to get to that right tax answer, so there's a huge increase in costs, so the business is making no profit. And that's the reason why you've got zero tax. No one's going to thank you for that, right? You're there to serve the business and to facilitate it, sometimes to protect it, but mostly to enable it. And I think, having that idea, certainly in-house, that you are interested in the business and you're always learning about it and you're curious about it, and not just the business, but actually that goes to wider tax. So as your key skills through your career, as you progress to a head of tax, try and take every opportunity you've got and try and make sure that you're not necessarily stuck in a box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's brilliant advice, Mark. Thank you. And if we turn it to as a partner then, and Julia, can I ask you then, what key skills do you think it requires now to be a partner? What do you see could change going forwards?
Well, I really agree with what Mark was saying about the importance of the team now. And actually that means for me right now, it's people matters that are at the top of my agenda. And certainly over the last 12 months, or 18 months really almost now, it's been incredibly difficult for everybody. And it's, that's for the partners in the team, and it's also for the most junior people in the team, some of them who've been working in very difficult circumstances. So over the last 12 months, it's been the people skills that have taken up my time. And that's been looking after my people's well-being. It's making sure that we continue to give them training, even when we're working remotely. We've had to really make sure that we focus on fair work distribution so that everybody is getting the opportunities and the experiences that they need to continue to have exciting opportunities. And that's because it's just so much harder to bump into people. So exactly as Sarah was saying, everything needs to be a bit more structured now. And so we've had to put in lots of different ways to make sure that people get to know other people in the team and they get the chance to get other interesting pieces of work. And of course, recruitment as well. We're all the issues we discussed at the beginning, we're all busy and we're looking for more people to join us. So those people issues have been central. And then I think that moves in obviously into the sort of the business development area and making sure that as a firm, we continue to have good, exciting projects with good clients. So the internal and the external networking over the last 12 months has been really important, and I think that will continue. And we've all had to change our styles. Gone are the days when it's, well, I'll pop by for a coffee, or can I come and have a meeting? I've now got many clients that I've never met in person, and I've had to build that relationship virtually. And so it's kind of ironic at a time when we all sort of started working at home on our own. Actually, the people side is just more important than ever.
Yeah, and Andrea, I think you touched on that when we spoke earlier on as well, the motivation of staff. So what else do you think you, as a tax partner, you need to have right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I joined KPMG right in the middle of lockdown. So my whole career in the last 12 months has been virtual. And I agree with Julia. I think the team and the interaction and the connectivity with individual team members has been so much more important, and we've had to really focus on that. How do you motivate staff when you're just sitting at home and you can't have that social interaction? So what do you do to try to, for me, how do I try to lead the team by my own example to do those sorts of things and sort of focus on the well-being and the motivation, and at the same time trying to do that networking remotely. And I think with that, it's funny, COVID has like a double-edged sword, doesn't it? You seem to have a lot more time because you don't have to travel anymore, but it seems to just disappear into the ether. I don't know where it goes. But at the same time, it's easy to get hold of people. So you do have the opportunity to have that networking, but it's harder to do an informal network when you're not just saying, oh, let's just go for coffee, because it's suddenly structured like a meeting. And I think trying to balance those two things can sometimes be quite difficult. And I think there's a lot, again, Julia picked up on this, I think our own time management and where we're using our time has become more important, myself and also for the team, managing the workload, making sure that some people aren't taking on too much because they don't have anything else to do and they just want to be working. And so we're quite conscious of that, and we've changed the way in which we allocate work and manage that. But I also think from my own perspective, coming in, I've been in-house for 15 years and come back into KPMG, some of the more operational things are missing in terms of the way I approach things. Okay, that's a brilliant idea, that's a great structure, looks fantastic. No business can ever implement that, and bring a little bit of that practicality to it as well, and also the oversight, because I think Mark picked up on this as well. It's not just transfer pricing, it's transfer pricing and international tax structuring, or claims and incentives, or employment tax, or indirect. You have to be so much more networked so that when you are working with clients, actually you're thinking about the wider impacts and the other tax impacts as well. And I think that's quite important. And then what I'd say is we're all on technology. So, when we're not very good at technology, then we need to get better at it. We need to, focus on that, because we lead calls, we do all sorts of things. Everybody looks to the leader. If I can't turn my video on or can't blur my background, people are going to be a little bit like, okay, well, if you can't do it, why should I? So that sort of thing, and leading by example, I think has been quite critical during COVID.
Yeah, and you've touched on the next point I wanted to ask about. Both you and Julia have moved back into practice from in-house, and what skills you brought. So you've touched on technology and projects, but also the applicability of project. Is there anything else you'd want to expand on in terms of other skills you've brought from in-house back into practice?
It's been quite an interesting, it's been 9 months now, because I find myself challenging lots of things all of the time. And people say, that's the way we've always done it. And I say, well, why have we always done it like that? And so there's lots of bits and pieces like that. And I've worked in a number of industries in a number of different countries. So bringing that sort of broad brush, but quite deep industry knowledge in has been, is quite different as well, because I think what I see is people say, oh yeah, I'm an expert in that industry, but actually they've done maybe 5 or 6 projects in that industry. That doesn't necessarily make them an expert, and doesn't necessarily mean that they know how the businesses operate, or how somebody made a comment the other day, oh yeah, we tried to email the finance department, but they said it was month end and they couldn't respond. And I sort of had to laugh and go, yeah, I mean that's just normal when you're in-house, right? But sometimes when you're in practice, people don't really sort of realize those sorts of things that are going on in the business. So it's some of those sort of more practical skills. And then I think also even just the management style in-house is slightly different from in practice. And so changing the way we do things and a bit more focused on the team, I think that's been a bit of a change. I think there's always been a strong culture for the team, but I think working with the business, working with the stakeholders in the business, I think that changes your approach and how you potentially deal with things.
Yeah, and Julia, your experience, I know you've mentioned before, no pointless information requests, which is maybe something similar to what Andrea's just mentioned, but any other experiences you found?
Yeah, I mean, I really like both bits of my career, and Mark was saying, getting to know the business. That was absolutely fantastic when I worked in-house, emphasizing we're all working towards a common goal, understanding how the business was going. And in practice, I contrast that with really enjoying the variety of working with many different businesses. So both have been good. But I actually think as an advisor, it's incredibly helpful to have spent some of that time in-house, because it allows you to put yourself in your client's shoes. And information requests is a really good example. The number of times as a client I would receive impossible information requests, and can you just get this all by tomorrow? Like, well, there's absolutely no way we're going to find any of that in our systems. What do you really need to know? Or I'm sure I sent you that 9 months ago. I really don't have time to send it to you again. And so I think when you've been in the position of somebody receiving an information request like that, you've got 100 things to do that day, and something comes in, your heart sinks. I think then you're much more critical when you're about to hit send on something, saying, well, if I'm in the client's shoes and I receive that, how am I going to feel like it? I mean, I think the other area where that comes through a bit is in advice. We deal with very complex, areas that quite often depend on judgment. And again, if you're a client and you receive something that is very technically based, as well, it could be this or it could be that, learning how you interpret that into something where you can give your business advice on what's the right decision to take, what are the risks, but what is the expected outcome, and why is that the right answer? Again, I think that's absolutely invaluable for an advisor to bring that, so that it helps them delivering advice to their clients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fascinating to see both sides and just the wealth of experience you can accumulate. So if we move on to CVs and interviews, Kyle.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think we're in the position now where everyone's knows that you can move role at the moment, and lots of people will be sort of coming out of back to normality and thinking about moving. So CVs, interviews, how does it all work now? Has anything changed, etc.? So starting off with CVs, I mean, right back to basics. Really important to get it right. But I'll start with you, Mark. What have you seen on a CV which stands out in terms of an applicant, and anything you've seen which goes against someone?
Yes, so I'll try and draw on what Andrea and Julia just said as well, because my view is, as they've just said, to be a good advisor. So even if you want to be an advisor, the best thing to do is spend some time in practice in-house, because it will change the way that you give advice, and all the good points they just made. But I think you also need to show that you're a team player, and that is hard in tax, because often you're working on small particular tasks, and you're maybe not managing that many people. Maybe you've got 1 or 2 direct reports at most. So I would urge you to take any opportunities you have, either in-house or in accounting practice, to work on projects as part of a team, and to be very clear on your CV the role you played, not the role of the project, but what did you do and how did you enhance the objectives of the project. So project work, teamwork, I look for. You asked for a view as to what I would rather not see. I'd rather not see too many moves in too short a time. I think if you're moving every 2 years, that rings alarm bells that maybe you're not committed to the role, or maybe it's pointing to a challenge with team fit. That's not to say it's rejected out of hand, it just needs a good explanation. If there's a pattern of behavior there, do I want to spend, or my team spend 6 months to a year getting you up to speed to do a role that you're going to then be looking to move away from pretty quickly? Probably not. There's a degree of needing loyalty to the company and the team that you're in. So I would say optimally you're looking at 3 to 5 years. It's just a broad brush approach. But in particular, worse than that is gaps on the CV. And again, unless there's a good explanation for a gap, even if you can't, there are circumstances I appreciate where it might be health, or it might be economic environment that means that you do have a gap. At least put that gap to good use somehow. I can't believe that there is nothing that you can do during that time unless perhaps it's health related. So have something to show for that time, even if it's not tax. That can turn it into a strong point.
Yeah,
there we go.
great.
Some really key takeaways there, I think, in terms of highlighting projects and exactly what you've done and outcomes, and then also managing those gaps, which I think is really important. And I know we'd echo those here at Brewer Morris. And Andrea, I'll come to you on the same point in terms of CV, sort of good things and bad things.
Yeah, well, if you think about it from the perspective that I have, which is I'm getting, you know, however many CVs for a particular role, what is it that I'm looking for? So I agree with Mark. You need a good explanation for your career. And if you have moved around, you know, spend some time and think about why you've moved around and have that ready to talk about, because you're going to get asked and you're going to get judged on that answer. So be really clear. I've done it. I've been in a role. It wasn't for me. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so I've moved pretty quickly. But when I interviewed for my next role, I was pretty honest with them about why I had moved, or why I was looking to move so quickly, because the role wasn't for me. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't a great fit. So sometimes that honesty, I think one of the other things I really like in a CV, and I'm starting to see it a little bit more, is about a little bit about your aspirations. So what do you want to do? So if you look at my CV, and you're welcome to go into LinkedIn, you'll see that I have moved a lot. I've moved countries and industries, although I've worked for companies for long periods of time, but I have moved around in different roles and things. And a lot of that has been about learning new skills. I've seen an opportunity that I wanted to learn about, whether it's supply chain or IP or just a different business or a different industry, and I've gone after a role quite specific. So what I like to see on CVs is, why is it that you want to come and work for me, and what is it that you're really hoping to get out of it? Because I always think an interview and when you apply for a job, it's a two-way thing. I want someone to come in and work for me, but you want to come in and work for me. Why do you want to work for me? You know, what is it about it? And sometimes it's a mixture of honesty and also just what your long-term aspirations are. I do like to scan the experience, but I don't spend a lot of time on it, because you're either you made it through to the interview process, so I expect that you've got the skill set. But I do like that bit about you at the beginning, a little bit about who you are, what you do, what's important to you, a bit of a personal profile, and just be aware that we do always go and check social media. I mean, that's just a reality these days, right? There's so much that's publicly available. LinkedIn's a great place to start. Make sure that your CV, we've had situations that it doesn't match. Make sure your CV, your LinkedIn profile match. And then, as Mark said, you know, don't try to overblow what you've done. Just be really honest about the role that you played and the contribution that you made. No one expects you to have led the project all the time, but we expect you to have participated and been part of that team. And we look for both technical skills, but we also look for competencies in terms of teamwork and trust and what your values are. And I think you need to be quite aware of that, because companies are testing you against the values of their company as well. And so you need to understand those sorts of questions that you're going to get, and make sure you can show that you can live up to those values.
Yeah, and diversity is also a key aspect in bringing those, you know, people through. And Sarah, I know from a Disney perspective and within your team, you've got some, you know, good diversity policies. So how do you ensure that through the recruitment process you do get a diverse range of candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's diversity and inclusion is absolutely key for Disney. You know, not just in the content that it's now offering to show diverse backgrounds, but also in our team. So we do have quite rigorous D&I inclusive processes, and that goes through all the different phases, from determining what the role is, posting a job, reviewing the CVs, interviewing, and then selecting the candidates. So a few examples are we talk about culture add, not necessarily culture fit. Because we want people to have different opinions and different ways of working that will actually add to the mix. I mean, it's important that they do gel with the team, but it's around finding perhaps new skills that aren't necessarily there in the team already. And then what we do is we sort of proactively headhunt sort of people who aren't, you know, if one area of the community is underrepresented in the selection candidates, we will proactively look for that. And then again, in interview panels, we'll have more than one person interviewing at all times. And we'll have a diverse range of management, male, female, ethnic backgrounds trying to interview, and again, very detailed, similar same questions asked, so that it's all very fair, that selection process. So it's absolutely key to us, and I think that's one of the things that's really going to help us. As Mark said, you know, you need different skills in the team. You can't all be clones of the same person. You know, you need specialists in different areas or people that work differently. And again, as we work more flexibly, again, having that diversity will really help, I think, enhance the team.
Yeah, and actually flexibility was something I think, Julia, at BDO, you're very open on as well. Do you want to elaborate a bit further?
Yeah, no, I think that's really right, Sarah. I think it's really interesting. I think that's one of the things that is coming out of this period of remote working, is I think most organisations see some future difference in how they're going to work going forward. So, for example, at BDO, we're talking about working agilely going forward. We've got different expectations of the amount of time that will be spent in the office. When people will be in the office, the focus is more likely to be on collaboration. Obviously, there will still be space for people who need quiet areas to work, but I do think it's quite a different way of working. But I think that agile working is going to be helpful in terms of giving people more flexibility around where and when they work. And I think that's incredibly important for example, young parents, so people who want to structure how they work around pickup times and nursery collections, etc. But actually also equally important now for people who are in the position of looking after elderly relatives. So I really think that this acknowledgement that it is possible to be equally, if not more efficient, working remotely is going to really help people look at doing jobs that they just couldn't have looked at doing before, because it meant a certain length of time physically sitting in an office. So I think that that's really helpful.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah, really helpful. And I suppose one thing to touch on, I mentioned video interviews at the start of this sort of section, and I think they're definitely not going away, seeing as we're all here virtually. But I think it would be really useful for people to understand, you know, from your side in terms of positive experiences you've had when doing video interviews, and any tips you can give to people in terms of, you know, how to give a good remote interview. So I'll come to you, Julia, on that one.
The first one's a bit unfair because technology does go wrong, but I do think to put yourself in the best position for the technology to go right is really important, because if you can't be seen or can't be heard or are having problems logging on, it just doesn't create the right first impression. And you can tell that most candidates these days take real care to make sure they know the program that the interview is going to be conducted, that they've logged on slightly early. Things go wrong and they are easily sortable, but to the extent you can control it, that is just sensible housekeeping. Self-presentation, I think, continues to be important. And actually, Amy and I were chatting about this as we prepared. I had a candidate a few weeks ago who appeared wearing a suit and tie. And that surprised me, just because you don't often see people working remotely wearing the suit and tie. And I don't expect that anyway at all. But I could tell that he was really keen on the job. And his self-presentation made me think, yes, he's really interested in a role here. This is something that matters to him. So I think still self-presentation is important. And then I think the third area I just mentioned, and actually it's very consistent with all the themes we've discussed, but trying to bring some warmth and personality, even though you're doing this virtually. And I suspect all of us are looking at the candidate trying to work out, yes, we want to know that they can do the job. We want to know they've got the technical experience and knowledge and they'll be able to develop. But actually, we really want to know that they're going to be the right fit for our team and that we're going to be the right fit for their team. So I spend quite a bit of time trying to get the candidates to relax and just see a bit of what they're really like, just to help both sides think, well, would this be the right fit? So try to bring some of yourself, even though it's virtual, try to relax. It should be an interesting process on both sides, and all both sides want to do is get the right person in the right job.
Yeah, interesting. I think we'll see a swathe of people turning up in suits and ties now you've said that.
Well, I definitely didn't expect it, and I don't expect it, but it was interesting. My reaction was, well,
yeah, that's very useful. And Mark, what about yourself in terms of positive experiences from video interviews?
So I'm really positive about them, actually. I've conducted probably half a dozen in the last 18 months, possibly more, where people have come on board as a result, and it's been a really successful process. My comments are a little bit more general about interviewing more generally. First of all, for a video conference, you need to treat it as if you are in person, right? So put yourself in that mindset, turn up a couple of minutes early, sort out your tech, as Julia says. But from my perspective, it becomes very clear very early on in an interview whether someone just wants a job or whether they want this job. And I'm only interested in people who want this job, because this is the role that I'm recruiting for. And to convince me that you want this job, you need to have done some research on the company. You need to understand it. We talked about values and the importance of that. But you don't need to parrot it all back at me, because I know it, but you can drop it into conversation which shows that you've done the research, that shows you're interested in the company, and that you understand why you want to come to this job. So is it the business? Is it the fact that you're going to have direct management and team experience? Is it because it's a new area for you and you want to develop your skill set and it's broadening? I don't mind particularly what the reason is. They can all be valid, but you need to have thought that through and decided. So do some research on the company, do some research on me and the team, right? We're on LinkedIn, you can find out about us. And I do I'm lucky enough in some ways to have a small enough team, so around 20 globally, that I interview everyone that comes into the team. And that's as much for them as it is for me. So we talk about an interview being a two-way process, have some sensible questions of me, but also I want you to know who I am, and whether you feel like if I'm setting the tone for the function at the top of the organization, do you want to work in that organization, right? That's completely legitimate for you to explore that as well.
Yeah, perfect. And on the flip side of that, I suppose in terms of sort of negative experience from video calls, Andrea, I will come to you on this one, because I think there's some interesting experiences from your side in terms of that.
Yeah, and I mean, just on the positive side, I agree with Julia and Mark. I've interviewed virtually for a role many years ago and found it really difficult, but didn't prep very well with the technology. So, technology always does go wrong. It's kind of critical that they can see and hear you. So even recently, we've had some examples where where the candidates haven't tried the link before the interview to check that it works, things like that. So if we've reached out to you and said, hey, check the link to make sure it works, we kind of expect that you've checked the link to make sure that it works and you can access the platform that we're going to conduct the interview on. But I guess probably the funniest interview, and it was for quite a senior role, the guy was sitting on a bouncy ball, one of those ones for your back. And so the whole interview, he's bouncing up and down, and it made it incredibly difficult to concentrate. I mean, like Julia's point about suit and tie, yeah, I like it when people dress up. He wasn't dressed up at all. It was just it looked like a really old t-shirt, and then he bounced the whole way. And I just thought, I mean, it's very hard to have an interview and take someone seriously when they're not sitting still, and it's so hard to focus as it is on a screen. So think about how you might come across to the interviewer, and you don't need distractions. So you don't really need to think about distractions. I think the other thing is, and I sort of hinted at this before, is listen really carefully to the questions. We probably all have this in terms of our organizations have a structured way in which interviews need to be carried out. And there'll be a mixture of technical questions, and there'll be a mixture of what we call competency questions. I love it when a candidate says, are you asking me X? Because they haven't necessarily understood what I've asked, but they want to clarify. So listen really carefully to the question and think hard. Are they asking me about a competency, or are they asking me about a technical? Because a number of times in interviews and video, because you're a little bit more remote, you can't tell from body language, they're answering the question incorrectly in terms of what we're looking for. So listen really carefully, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine. Ask for clarification, take a bit of time. It's fine to say, actually, can I have a minute to think about an example, or whatever it is. But don't just launch it into the question and get it wrong, basically, because we are looking for specific attributes as part of the answer of that. The other thing that I always say is, and I'm a bit of a stickler for this, because over the years I've learned that I'm not perfect. It's very hard to accept, but there are aspects about me that are not brilliant, and I've learned to accept them, understand them, and figure out how to try to manage them. So I love it in an interview if you ask people about development points or weaknesses or areas that they need to develop, that they're quite clear with you on what those really are, but also how they manage them and how they combat them. So it's that age-old thing, take your weakness and turn it into a positive. But I also like when people give you examples about behaviours where they might have failed, but then they tried something else and that worked, because it shows that they're great with teamwork, it shows they're great with people, and they're constantly trying to improve themselves and the way in which they interact with others. And I think that shows the type of candidates that I would like to have in my organisation, that are constantly trying new things and trying to improve their own skill set as well.
And actually, you're sort of leading there on to how to make an impact as well, Andrea, or, you know, the skills to make that impact. So if I can just continue with you on a similar front, you obviously started your role remotely. And so what worked well in terms of your onboarding and settling in terms of the impact that you've been able to make?
Yes, I started in July, so right in the middle of COVID. And would you believe my technology worked on the first morning? I mean, you wouldn't read about it, right? I just assumed it would be at least a week. Not only did it all work, but I had access to pretty much everything, which for me as a new partner joining had a huge impact, because I didn't expect it, and it was great that it was all set up and worked. So I think that sort of stuff is really important, and I know that we all struggle internally with our technology, but they had a great impact on me. I think the other thing that I found hard, but I found positive and invigorating, is I had to keep putting myself out there to meet people. Not only was I networking to try to with clients, but I was also networking internally with the organization, with my team, which is about 50 people. And so I felt like I must have done maybe 100 introductions of myself until I couldn't be talking about my experience anymore. But, you know, really putting yourself out there and getting to learn to meet people, and then follow-ups. I had to be quite organized in myself in terms of, okay, they mentioned that person, I need to follow up, or I need to, you know, I would make hundreds of lists. So I had lists everywhere of things that I needed to do or follow up or have conversations. But starting a new role during COVID was challenging, but also easy in some ways, because you could get access to people that you would never normally get. And nobody was traveling, everyone was in the office.
Yeah, no, and we sort of want to focus on just making that impact for the remainder of this session, and we've got only about 10 minutes left, I'm afraid. But Julia, something that you'd mentioned as well, because I know you'd started a video just before COVID, but it was that getting clever with visibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think Andrea is really right about the challenges, and it's you know, how do you make sure that you start building your network, people start coming to you with questions, whether it's internal or external. And I think you do have to be much more structured about that now. So I think now most people are pretty unembarrassed about sending somebody an instant message, emailing them, hi, I'm new, would you have time for a virtual coffee? I'd like to introduce myself, I'd like to hear what you're doing. So I think that sort of self-starter ability is really important. And the most, you know, to be successful at pretty much most roles will depend on your network. So putting in structure in place to make that happen. I think the other thing that's quite important, and you know, I think there are clever ways you can do it. So, you know, there's a sort of virtual cup of coffee is the obvious way, but certainly I put my hand up for absolutely every WebEx where I could contribute valuably and also make sure that people began to see my face, get to know who I was. So that was really helpful as well. I've done quite a lot of LinkedIn articles. I've done a lot of BDO internal articles, but there's a virtual copy, but there are more subtler ways you can do it. And then the other thing that I say to people is just to remember it's a marathon and not a sprint. You know, people join, and quite rightly, and they bring passion and enthusiasm and excitement, and that's fantastic. It's just what we want. But you know, they have to remember this is a 2 to 10 year job that they've got, and actually the most important thing is they build those right connections. They begin to get a feel for their role, and just not to panic that they're not 100% busy the second hour when their computer just finally manages to work. You know, take the time, learn what's going to be important to make your role work, understand your objectives, think about how you're going to make them. You need that time so that when you have an impact, it's the right sort of impact.
Exactly, and Mark, the same is on the in-house side, isn't it, with meeting with stakeholders when joining remotely?
Yeah, everything that has just been said in practice follows in-house as well. You know, it's been a year now. We're used to it. You know, I've had people in my team, contractors, who have come and then finished their fixed-term contracts and left, and I've never met them. I haven't seen my team face to face for over a year now as well. It happens, I'm in the office today, but they're not. So, you know, it's about those structures, right? And that, as a leader of a team, is partly what I'm interested in putting in place, so that you've got other people to turn to as you're new, whether it's buddies or whether it's just people who are working in a similar role as you. They might be your junior or they might be your senior. You know, there's line management structures, neural networks where you can feed off other people's information to get to the right answer. And I put in a lot more team meetings, be it 1-to-1, 2-to-1s, or, you know, fun meetings, right? And we've gone from a relatively new team since I joined about 2 or 3 years ago to a team that wasn't talking to each other, that was siloed, to a call where we're having, you know, virtual Christmas quizzes, ugly jumper competitions, and people, more importantly than all of that, opening up about their mental health to each other online as part of a team. Now, that to me, I mean, it's not great news that people are suffering with their mental health at all, but the fact they're able to talk about it openly says to me that I'm doing something right about the team and the culture, and the fact that we can support each other through this.
No, yeah, that's really good to hear. And you mentioned something about the Muriel network, which is an interesting way of phrasing it, and I'll take that away. But also, Sarah, the buddy system was mentioned there, and I think it's something that maybe you found onboarding people a little bit of a challenge due to a high number, but the buddy system really worked for you, didn't it?
Yeah, so we have had, due to the Fox acquisition, we've had actually a significant growth in the size of the team, and we actually have a large proportion of the team that have never met each other, never been in the office, and so we have done the similar things, you know, the quizzes, the coffee chats, as well as, you know, work team meetings. To sort of create that team spirit, and I think we've done well. I think the one thing that we do miss is the Disneyfication of the office. We have that Disney magic, and you know, where you swipe your pass, it's Mickey Mouse ears and things like that. So I think we do miss a little bit of the magic working from home, but hopefully we'll be able to create that soon. But the buddy system is key, because, you know, you're not sat next to someone you can sort of feel like you can ask the stupid question of how do you do this or what do you do that. So having a buddy that they feel that they can ask those stupid questions to, rather than your manager, I think is really key to help settling in and feeling part of the team. So yeah.
Yeah, and actually getting people involved, especially when somebody might be a little bit more introverted, it has also been a challenge remotely. And Andrea, how have you adapted to that?
Yeah, so we've had a similar problem to Sarah in terms of when we bring people in, trying to get them a little bit more visible. And again, like Sarah, particularly when we've got a lot of introverted people coming in who feel a little bit more uncomfortable about putting themselves out there. Actually, what we've done is we've done exactly the same as Sarah, and we've implemented a buddy system, and we've tried to do it around the same sort of grade level as well, so that we're building for those teams. We're building them as a team in themselves, because I think that naturally happens when you're in the office. when you're not in the office, actually how do you build that strength of network? And me myself, I'm still friends with everybody I started with in KPMG, you know, many years ago, because of the way we built and that the strength of that team and how we supported each other and trying to build that internally. We have gone through the team and we've given everybody an area of responsibility. And, you know, I've thought very carefully about it after meeting them. Are they introverted, extroverted? How do we get them slightly out of their comfort zone in terms of pushing them a little bit more to be a bit more visible, managing weekly meetings or, you know, one-to-ones, you know, those sorts of things. And I personally try to reach out to every single person in the team just to have a bit of a conversation, a bit of a check-in as to where they're at. And, you know, it helps build that relationship because I've never met any of them. It helps build that relationship, but also it reminds them actually they're an important voice in the team and that should be heard. And I think those sorts of things have sort of helped with that.
Yeah, and I think the key word that's coming out is really communication and keeping communicating and the visibility. I mean, the last question for today, and Mark, I'll come to you first because I know you have to jump off at 1:30. But making a positive impact in a new role, but even if you're in a role, you're not looking to move, but making an impact to move up in a promotion might be a little bit more of a challenge now that you're in the office less, senior management are in the office less, or even if it's a case of just being 2 days a week. So I'm going to ask all the panel as a conclusion, but Mark, if I can start with you, what advice would you provide to people to help people make an impact, have that exposure to senior leadership, either in a new role or when they're aiming for a promotion?
So I think first of all, you have to do your job well, right? Before you starting to look at the next role, make sure that you're impressing in the projects or the tasks or the opportunities you're given. When you've started to do that and made that impression, ask for more, branch out, keep looking at other things that you could grow into, and again, it works in the team that you've got to be right for the team. The team's got to be right for you. If there are those structures that allow you to learn on the job, and indeed, as I do with my team, if they've done the work, they're the ones that present it to senior leadership. I'll be in the room to help them and guide them. They, you know, if they're uncomfortable with it, clearly I'll take the lead. But it's their work. They know it better than me, and they should get practice at communicating it, because as we've just said, that's critical in leading a team and promoting up to the C-suite. Own a development plan would be my next point. Be clear on where you want to go and in what time frame. What are you missing? If you're looking strategically at building blocks that you want to get in-house, or a head of tax role or a partnership role, what is it that you need to do that? Where have you not got the experience? Talk to your mentor, if you have one, or line manager, about how to get that experience, and actually map it strictly. I need this. This is what I'm going to do about it in this time frame. And then you come to the next year, you've done it, you're on to the next building block. But overall, and this is something that I had to learn, an uncomfortable lesson on when I was at KPMG and just come out from the law firm, and was thought that my USP was entirely my technical knowledge, and they wanted me to be a people leader. I thought, that's ridiculous. I'm going to be no good at it, and also I'm going to completely devalue my technical expertise. As it happens, that was the best thing that I ever did in my career. I loved it. I enjoyed it. I was quite good at it, and it's given me the opportunity to grow my career. So make and take opportunities that come your way.
That's brilliant. No, that's great, Mark. Thank you. And if you need to drop off, obviously, yeah, thank you very much. And Sarah, I know you're a little bit tight for time as well, but one thing you'd mentioned earlier, maybe leading on, is also taking on extracurricular activities and volunteering for different projects.
Yeah, so again, similar to what, just take those, be proactive, be keen, be interested to take on additional projects, and perhaps stretch you out of your comfort zone to take on those new projects and grow. But yeah, I mean, volunteer for things, have extracurricular activities. I mean, Disney has loads of them, especially on the D&I front, and additional roles, because again, that gets you visibility, not just within the team, but in that external network wider in the company, and it's fun, and you get to meet more people, so I really, and it makes that you as a person more rounded, and again, as the panel have said, you know, that's really a positive when it comes to interview, that someone's a more rounded person. They're not just purely tax technical, you know, that they have some different interests and are well rounded. So yeah, I would do that. On an impact particularly though, I do think that virtual working has really helped, because everyone's the same size box on a screen, and so therefore, you know, if you do have something interesting to say, don't be frightened about speaking up. You know, I think you've got equal opportunity, so seize that opportunity. Obviously, if you don't have anything intelligent to say, don't speak up for the sake of it. But yeah, I think this virtual working does provide opportunities to speak, which perhaps you wouldn't necessarily if it was in an office environment.
And absolutely, you've got to, you can't be held back by a situation. You have to turn it around and utilize it to your advantage. Julia, when we spoke previously, you'd mentioned about curious coffees, which I loved the idea of, and recommended internally to Borough Morris and the SR group actually. But do you want to just talk about that and the impact that you would recommend, or the methods of impact somebody could take away?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything Mark and Sarah have said is absolutely spot on. And I think one thing, particularly in an advisory firm, is one of the areas that you can bring value to your clients and your team is actually by making connections. You know, I've got a particular tax problem, but actually, you know, there's a systems solution that might help towards the tax problem, or else, oh, this client in this industry, they've got an issue with this, might you have it? And, you know, could we help you solve it? So that sort of softer area of networking. One of the initiatives we have at BDO, and there are other organisations have similar initiatives, is initiatives around curious coffees. So you can say, yes, I'd like to meet somebody outside my normal line of business, and you get matched by, I don't know whether it's an individual or an algorithm. I suspect it's an individual. And then so I could then just go, and I wouldn't know who I'm going to meet. I'll get an invite put into my calendar, and to be somebody I've not met before in a different area of the business. And invariably you have something in common, you learn something, you build a new connection. And I think those softer areas really help you. I mean, they're interesting on a personal level, but they also really help you add value to your clients and to your teams.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I know, Andrea, we talked about the pod system that you'd use for visibility, which was also a really good idea. Do you want to just expand on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with everything Sarah, Mark and Julia said. We struggle a little bit, you know, when you're in a big team to get that visibility. So what we did was, and I can take no credit because it was in place when I started, but we've kept it going. We created pods. So we split the team into smaller groups, but a cross section. So there'd be a partner, a director, a senior manager, managers, all the way down to consultants, assistant managers, etc. And then they meet weekly or fortnightly to talk about technical issues. Each pod comes along to one of the monthly meetings and presents something. So we've had technical skills, we've had soft skills. And then every so often we change up the pod. So you'll be with a completely different group of people. And it's just a way the senior managers manage those pods or take the lead on those pods. It's just a way to see a really nice cross section of the team. And you know, for me, it's been brilliant to learn and meet everybody. And we try to make the juniors actually run those meetings a little bit more than say the seniors. We're just there to provide insights and things. And so that's been really helpful for us as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, look, we've run over just by a little bit, but thank you very much to our panelists for sharing their experiences, their insights, and obviously for sharing your time with us today. Mark has had to shoot off, but Andrea, thank you very much, and to Julia and to Sarah. And I just want to say to you as a listener as well, you know, Kyle and I would be delighted to receive any feedback, but I'm particularly keen to hear on any key takeaways or takeaway points you're going to take from today's session, anything that you will use, change, utilize, action. So do feel free to send me an email just with feedback and one key takeaway that you'll at least use. But thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Amy. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, everyone.